Well, the thing is, the simulation pushes you outside of the muck, the messiness of everyday details of science, and makes you ask big questions about like the nature of our reality. And I like to think of it as like how would we build a simulation? Like what would be a compelling enough virtual reality game that you want to stay there for all your whole life? That's a first step there. That's useful to think about, like, what is our reality? What aspects of are most interesting for us humans to be able to perceive with our limited perception and cognitive abilities, interpret and interact with? And then a bigger question then is, like, how do you build a larger scale simulation that would be able to create that virtual reality game, which I think is a possible future. We're already creating virtual worlds for ourselves on Twitter and social networks and so on. I really believe that virtual reality will spend more and more of our lives in the next 50 to 100 years in virtual worlds. I think there's the question of what's outside simulation is really interesting. That's the other way because like, what created us? What started the whole thing? It's the modern version of asking, what is God? What does God look like? It's asking, what does the programmer look like? Yeah, it's very possible that we live in a simulation. I think one of this constructs of physics, theoretical physics, with many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, as Sean has talked to you about, reveals some interesting sort of fundamental building blocks of our reality. There's something I don't think people have talked to you about, which is like the coolest thing to me, the most amazing thing that nobody can explain yet, are things called cellular automata. And there's a guy, mathematician named John Conway, who came up in the 70s with a thing called game of life. And cellular automata are these two-dimensional or one-dimensional, but game of life is two-dimensional grid where every single little cell is really dumb and it behaves based on the cells next to it. And it's born when there's like a certain number, like 3 cells alive next to it, and it dies otherwise. So it's like a simple rule for birth and death. And all it knows its nearby surrounding and its own life. And if you take that system with a really dumb rule and expand it in size, arbitrary complexity emerges. You can have Turing machines, so you can simulate perfect computers with that system, and it can grow, and all these behaviors grow. Like if people Google like game of life, and you can watch this extremely dumb, simple system just grow arbitrary complexities. And what you start to realize that from such incredibly simple building blocks that don't know anything about the bigger world around them, you can build our entire universe. You can build the kind of complexities we see in this. So like we think like God is like designing every little aspect or whatever of our world, or a simulation hypothesis. The simulation is designed by hand, like I'm going to craft these things. What you realize is all you need to do is just set some initial conditions, set some really basic rules, and allow the system to grow. As long as it can grow arbitrarily, just crazy stuff, amazing stuff can happen. From simplicity, complexity can emerge. And that, if you study this a little bit closer, just like watch it, people can watch a Game of Life on YouTube and think about what it's showing, like for 10 minutes. It'll blow your mind. The fact that from simplicity, arbitrary complexity, beauty can emerge is like incredible. So for the simulation, the creator of the simulation is probably some 13-year-old nerd living in his mom's basement. Is probably just set some rules in this video game and press play, and then arbitrary complexity can emerge. It can have a Joe Rogan. It can have an Elon Musk. All the technologies that we've developed, and probably millions of other alien species that are living throughout our universe. The cellular automata reveals that the simulation is much easier to create than we might think. But there's a lot of variability in the kinds of simulations we'll create. Like, I think the simulation hypothesis thinks there's like one, but I think there's going to be a lot of varieties. There's a lot of possible different rule sets. There's a lot of different physical mediums in which these simulations could be created. It can be a completely virtual world. The role of consciousness, whether you make most people conscious or not, whether most of them are philosophical zombies, or they're just like non-player characters, and it's just you, or is your mind simulated? Like the role of suffering. So consciousness brings with it this idea of basically, subjective experience. And with subjective experience comes the idea of pain and fear and so on. Like just like with the Native Americans, the fact that suffering seems to be a constant story that was woven in.
Mm-hmm.
Like we constantly progress, but we seems to be like creating the other and torturing, and there seems to be constant suffering and war and so on through this growth process. Again, my Russian romanticization of it, but I think fear of death is essential. Scarcity is essential for beauty, for life.
Yeah.
And that's a nice feature of this little simulation we got going on, that there could be a lot of different alternatives, I think, that could be less individualistic, less consciousness can be present in different kinds of forms.